I wanted to jump a little bit, I wanted to spend some time on some of the money related issues that arise after a couple gets married and how to, um, how to skillfully address them. Before you get married, if you find that your partner's values or philosophy about money are fundamentally too incompatible with your own, while it can be painful, it's not catastrophic to break up, call it quits, go your separate ways. Certainly easier to do that than after you're married, and immensely easier to do that if you don't have kids yet. Um, in your experience, after a couple gets married, what are the common reasons why couples fight about money, and what tend to be the common triggers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most obvious is spending, how to allocate the funds between the two, because now you have mine, yours, and ours. And I think a lot of newlyweds have a hard time navigating this prioritization of how to spend the money, how much to spend on certain categories. That's where, those questions before getting married can be really critical in the practice of blending money. Now, most couples don't want to fully blend their financial lives until after they get married, which is understandable. But if you can have those proactive conversations before getting married about how are we going to blend our money? What are our financial priorities? Sketching out a rough budget of what life is going to look like together. Really critical. And so I think one of the biggest things where I have to do a lot of relational rehab is when partners have had a lot of conflict around money and have been judgmental, critical, contemptuous about what the partner's doing with money. Um, John Gottman is a great marriage researcher, and he says there's the four horsemen of the apocalypse for relationships,
Hmm.
and contempt is one of them. I'm sorry, I'm not getting them back up in my head, but your listeners can look them up. If you're using any of those behavioral patterns around money, you're going to destroy a lot of trust, and it's going to take a lot of time to come back around to that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's where, kind of blending that emotional regulation, knowing how am I coming across to my partner, being able to manage your own frustrations, the relational security patterns are really important.
You mentioned spending as an obvious one. Does that problem dissipate as the couple just becomes wealthier? Like the more money they make, does that problem go away, or is it always there fundamentally at some level?
Yeah,
When that issue is in the picture.
it only intensifies. And that's one of those cognitive errors that I think a lot of us have in society, is that we have this simple equation in our head that more money will mean fewer problems. And there's, I'm not thinking what the great rap song is, "Mo money, mo problems." I'm embarrassed I can't remember it, but anyhow, what's happening beneath that phrase, "Mo money, more problems," is the psychological misalignment between the partners. And just making more money does not improve the psychological connection between the two partners. So if we have two insecurely attached individuals from that attachment theory, right, we have four categories: secure, which means I'm generally comfortable with myself and generally comfortable trusting my partner. Anxious means I'm not really secure in myself, but I'm always looking to the other person for validation. Never really sure when they give me validation that they actually do love me and care about me. The avoidant basically says, I'm going to do me and you do you. And when you're in emotional distress, you got to go figure that out. And then disorganized is that mix of avoidant and anxious,
Hmm.
right? So when we look at those attachment styles and then we bring it to the money table, and then we're talking about spending, you can see where two securely attached individuals could sit down and work through the differences and accept the fact that they are going to be different on some spending priorities. But if you're anxious or avoidant on the attachments, your ability to have the relational trust and skills necessary to navigate spending differences and to bring things into control and perspective is going to be more likely impaired.
Hmm.
And so just adding more money to the mix is going to be very problematic. This is where I've seen issues around financial infidelity come up, especially around the anxious partners. They don't want to disclose that they've made mistakes because they're already afraid of being rejected around spending. And they also want to often be very pleasing to their partner. And so they'll just kind of keep the checkbook open and the spending open, and they'll get in a cycle of making more money to try to keep the partner happy.
Mm,
I think especially, a slight shift in this pattern is the upwardly mobile professional with the partner that gets off the career track to stay home and raise the kids, and they start to split. Inevitably, if that person's upwardly mobile and working more and away from the home more, there's less time for emotional relational connection. Money becomes the stand-in for that, but money can never fulfill the need for emotional relational connection fully.
mm,
And so that's, you get the 20 to 30-year marriage with the kids that are late high school and they're going apart.
mm, mm,
Like that didn't really resolve their intimacy needs.
mm. That it sounds like that's a pretty common occurrence, and that is also a common, for good or for bad, a common family arrangement, especially if there are multiple kids. It's just so difficult to balance a like a demanding family life and also a demanding career. Are there what can couples do? Like, are there strategies or tips that couples can do intentionally and continuously to mitigate that drift?
Yeah. And so this is right. If we think about, we're moving along the lifespan of the intimate relationship. And I love your questions because you're starting out like, how do we start from the right place from the beginning? What are those right questions to start with? Then what do we do in the early phase of marriage where most couples don't have kids together, right? But I don't want to even say most. If you have kids right out of the gate and you're married, that's a somewhat of a different situation than like you get married, you work professionally for 3 to 5 years, and then you have kids, which is not an uncommon pattern for professionals. Well, the amount of time you have to sit down and talk about your finances and your life together is significantly more in this period of time than once kid one enters. Once kid two and three enter, the amount of time goes down significantly. And so what I like to encourage couples is, and I've seen this in my own life, is my wife and I don't have as many money dates where we sit down and review our spending, our investments, where we had it. What does your professional life need? What does my professional life need? Okay, here's how we're going to go forward. Right? Ideally, you want to meet on that, once a month, once a quarter. But then there's all the money decisions that happen in between that. And those are kind of the ad hoc or as needed money talks. And I think being able to have that expectation that that's going to be needed and need to happen is pretty important. So you want to have that balance of being able to have ad hoc money conversations, and then to know, like, and this depends on the temperament of the couple, but they know that they're going to meet together once a month or once a quarter, something that's on some regular rhythm. I think it can also be very helpful as the relationship is maturing, is to identify a fee only financial planner that can act as the third in your relationship,
Mm,
because a really good financial planner is going to be able to ask both parties about their values, what they want, and how they're doing in getting them. And it takes pretty mature individuals to be able to do that in the relationship just for themselves.
mm.
Right? We're all biased towards knowing what we want more than the other person, and if, holding the other person's needs in mind can be challenging for some of us. So that's where I think, getting that financial planner to help you start critically thinking through your financial life becomes even more important.
Got it. Besides potential spending conflicts, are there other common reasons married couples fight about money in your experience, or common triggers that cause it?
Um, yeah, yeah, I mean, so in some, like, spending money is that high level, like how money is spent is the high level piece. But when we drill down into that, well, what are we talking about? Well, there's the food, the housing, the cars, vacations. But then there's this other area that a lot of couples end up in, which is family support and money.
Say more about that.
So do I have a mother or mother-in-law that needs financial support, or an you know brother or sister that needs ongoing financial support, some extended family member that may become financially dependent on you and your spouse. What's the right or appropriate level of financial provision for that family member? How do we have that conversation with each other, find that balance of support, or do we support, and what are our limits there? That can get into some pretty tricky water pretty quickly.
How that's hard. How do you are how do you do that?
Yeah, right. Good question. So ideally, what you're doing is starting from a place of financial empathy and empathy for your partner or your spouse, and that the the likely mixed feelings they have about providing support for that family member. I think we would like to think that we're all very altruistic individuals, and that of course we'd want to take care of our family members, but that's just not reality. I think we all have mixed feelings, and so I think part of the how you do it is normalizing that they probably are having mixed feelings about it, and giving them space to talk about the mix of feelings that they have about it. It's incredible how being engaged in that type of process, solutions will emerge,
Mm.
right? And so that's where, for me, especially when I'm working with couples as a therapist, they're coming to me wanting a solution to the problem. But more often, what I do is engage them in a process of talking with each other about what they're experiencing, what their expectations are, how things that they've seen in the past may be shaping what they're thinking, how things should be going now. And as they hear each other, they start to recognize and see their shared humanity and the challenge of it. And it positions them into often a more collaborative stance of saying, okay, well, now in light of this, what are we going to do? What makes the most sense? And sometimes these issues are, the needs are chronic, or in that, the elderly parent is not going to get meaningful work, is not going to have a substantial change in their financial life. And so you do have to come to some difficult conversations about, do they come move in with us? Do we provide a certain amount of money on a reoccurring basis? Or do we just say, I'm sorry, there's nothing that we can do. We're going to put our own financial life in jeopardy. And so those aren't easy conversations, but they do come up more than I think we are able to talk about with our friends.
Yeah, I imagine those are, especially tricky as well, because they're also just hard to talk about. And I'm just curious, um, yeah, are there ways to bring those kinds of issues up before you even get married, so that mm, you at least can be more intentional about going into that kind of situation, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's one of those great questions. Is I- so kind of in the money conversations, what money conversations we have is having that conversation. Tell me a little bit about your parents. What does their financial life look like? What do you imagine ever being financially responsible for your parents in the future?
Mm.
If so, what are your thoughts and feelings about it at this time? How do you think we would cross that bridge? Life is full of so many uncertainties that you can't always fully predict or be prepared for all these things. But I think you can have some proactive conversations on the front end around what are the thoughts and what are the expectations. And again, you're going to get a sense for their values and their sense of clarity. When they answer that question, answering those questions for yourself. God, what is my parents' financial reality? I mean, the reality is that many people live with at least one, within the couple, at least one set of parents is divorced, which adds complexity, right? If not both. And so you've got family members kind of can be all over the place, and being able to think about, well, what are my family's expectations of me?
Mhm.
And if you're not if you don't know, this is also a great time, depending on the quality of relationship you have, is to go have that conversation with mom and dad and say, "What are your expectations of me as an adult and financially?" And they, you know, again, this depends on the overall family culture, how open they're going to be to having these types of conversations. And what I understand to be healthy family culture, you can have these types of conversations with pretty good responses. But some parents are going to feel really uncomfortable about that. They're not going to want those kind of conversations to come up.
Mm.
And if that's the reality, then that's just something to know and to be aware of that you're going to be working with.
In scenarios where one spouse's side of the family needs this kind of recurring financial support, and yet the spouse is, I guess, at some base level disagree about either whether to provide that support or how much support to provide, do those um, are those situations in your experience tenable? Like, or do they uh, more often than not like end up in a bad place?
I, I've seen it go both ways for sure. And it, you know, not to overly harp on any one concept, but I think it is to some degree allow that to build resentment and anger. So I think if in a healthy relational process, you can talk about and acknowledge that these are maybe perpetual differences between the two of us, but that we still are committed to each other in the long term, our long term relationship. And the reality is that that external financial reality, external to the couple, will likely also be shaping the couple's financial expectations of what they want to create for themselves in the future. So a number of couples that I've worked with have had the financially dependent parent and they don't want that for themselves. And so they can become hyper vigilant to wanting to create wealth or financial security for themselves. And it can create an unbalance there if the other person is not on that same board or doesn't understand that that's part of the driving component is that fear of I don't want to end up like mom or dad.
Got it. I was curious, kind of related to this. Are you generally an advocate or proponent for this notion of, having separate accounts after you're married, or a derivative of that being some folks join their accounts, but then they have separate discretionary accounts that are kind of no questions asked, uh, that are just a small amount of money set aside per period, whether it's a month or a quarter or whatever, but some small discretionary account where there's no questions asked about how they use it, whether they want to just buy something that they like that the other partner may not agree with, or whether they want to use it to support family members or what have you. Is this generally a good technique, or uh, indicative of not a great relationship dynamic?
I think more often than not, it comes from it can be coming from a place of good intention, just wanting to have just make things run smoother. But I think beneath the surface for many couples, there's can be some real fear and anxiety. There can also be some direct family messages about, honey, you need to keep your own money, right? I think a lot of women get that message, especially when their their parents went through a contentious divorce and money, and alimony were not provided correctly. That can leave a lot of emotional residue and a need for some sense of self-protection and self-preservation. I think it can be a short-term solution, but probably is not a long-term great option. I'm this is where I'm very careful in these types of places is because it's really dependent on the level of relational security and trust. If there's high degrees of relational security and trust, and each person just wants to have a little money to go and do whatever they want to do with, fine. But I think if that's going to be the case, there also needs to be a place for there's financial transparency. If some you do need to ask, or I don't think you can just spend without your partner ever checking in on you, right? Yeah, like if the intention is I just want to be able to spend the money without you being critical of the fact that I like mountain bikes or I like video games or I like musical equipment or I like, pumps, shoes. Okay, so be it. But I think the deeper question you have to ask yourself is if your partner's showing up with you around your money that way, maybe there's a deeper issue that needs to be addressed.
Mm, mm.
Why are you being critical of your partner in the way that they spend money? Part of the way we spend money is an expression of who we are as a person. And so if you're being critical of your partner in the way that they spend money, there's probably something else there that needs to be really addressed at a deeper level.
Got it. What are some best practices that you've observed for how spouses can fight about money productively and effectively with each other in a way that keeps the relationship healthy and even strengthens it?
Yeah, I think that that's a really important question to answer. And so, because there will be some couples that fall on the conflict avoidance side of the continuum, where they feel frustration and anger about financial topics, but they won't bring it up. Right? That can be just as destructive as having the loud knockdown, drag out fights, because ultimately nothing's getting resolved in either of those contexts. So, what you want to be able to do is to be able to come again. I use that word empathy, but when you have that financial disagreement, is being willing to be vulnerable and go into the conversation and be curious about what's going on for their partner, what needs are they wanting to get fulfilled in this disagreement, and then be able to say, this is what I'm needing, and having that relational expectation that your partner will want to meet and understand that as well. This all comes out of secure attachment and secure patterns of relating in the relationship, right? So we're applying it to money dynamics, but it really can be secure relationship patterns are important for parenting kids, for sexual intimacy, for dealing with the in-laws, right? For negotiating work patterns, navigating spirituality, right? Our attachment pattern is such a huge predictor of the way that we experience our intimate relationship. So we're just using attachment to help us, well, what are the right ways to talk about money right in this conversation?
You talked earlier about the different quadrants or categories of attachment. I don't know if I'm using the right kind of terminology, but
Categories. Yeah, that's great. Or
right.
style.
Um, are is like, what is the prevailing wisdom in terms of like, are you do you fall into a category or can you move between them? Are there exercises that couples can do to self-identify, I don't know, what they are, and also how they can move into a more productive category?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research, and this is where a lot of the couples therapy work is focused on helping couples identify their attachment patterns and move to what's called earned secure attachment, right? If we want to remember about attachment is the relationally learned process. It's the quality of the way that interactions between our primary caregivers what were between us. So no, they don't just change on a dime. They're deeply embedded within our neural networks. But as we experience new relational patterns and more relational security, we can move towards more of that secure functioning, right? The secure functioning has an internal expectation that my needs will be met, that I'll be understood, and that I'll be accepted for who I am. And then I'm going to offer that to the other person. So that's where like empathy is a key skill in forming secure attachment, because empathy is that ability to imagine the other person's state and what it means to them and accurately reflect it back to them.
Are there like exercises that couples can self implement? So not everybody will have, or maybe be able to afford a couples counselor to guide them through these things. Like, how can couples develop um, a shared language and some shared skills around, both identifying where they are and how to sort of get better, so to speak.
Yeah, so I think, one, I would point to a couple of great books, and then I'll see if I can end on an exercise that couples can use, and then I need to wrap up for today's conversation. So I think one Two books I would recommend is Love Sense by Dr. Sue Johnson. She does a phenomenal job of helping people understand what an attachment style is, what it means, and what you can do about it in the intimate relationship. If you find that you know that you grew up in this environment that was not relationally secure or stable, was very threatening to you, Diane Poole Heller has a phenomenal book called Healing Your Attachment Wounds, and that's going to get into much deeper levels of the way that our attachment system can become injured. So for couples though, if you're not going into therapy, you need to find those self-help books on attachment. Practically one of the best things to do is to just be able to see, can we even look at each other in the eye and do that safely? And that just practicing being able to sit with each other and looking into each other's eyes will start to build connection between the couple. So take the money, take everything off the table. If you're finding that you're having trouble getting on the same page, see if you can do some experiments with each other about looking into each other's eyes and feeling comfortable with that. That is being held psychologically safe, right? We're looking into each other's eyes as we're having this conversation right now. And it creates a sense of like, oh, Andrew's here with me. He's interested in what I'm saying. It allows me to continue to want to engage with you, right? That's what we get when we get eye contact. That's a big part of building attachment.
All right, well, Ed, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me. I didn't get through all my questions, but this is like definitely a lot of content for folks to, I think about, because this is like the real stuff. So I appreciate your sharing your wisdom today, and look forward to sharing this with our audience.
Great. You're welcome, Andrew. It was a pleasure to be with you. And you asked some phenomenal questions. And I love that you're thinking about the whole arc of the relationship, and building a healthy relationship from the beginning is a great measure to take.
All right, take care.